introductory information. So wanted to thank everyone for joining us for this artist talk with Vanessa Maltese in conjunction with her solo exhibition, Fact or Fiction. My name is Magdalyn Asimakis, and I'm the Director of Research and Artist Relations at Cooper Cole in Toronto. Cooper Cole, for those of you that don't know, is a commercial gallery that was established in Toronto in 2012, and we represent Canadian and international contemporary artists. I will also read Vanessa's brief bio. Vanessa Maltese is a Toronto-based artist working in painting, sculpture, and video. Her work references familiar patterns and shapes to pose questions about visual and cognitive perception. She's the national winner of the 2012 RBC Canadian Painting Competition and has exhibited her work in solo and group exhibitions across North America. Most recently, she's exhibited at Mickey Gallery in Chicago in 2020, Night Gallery in Los Angeles, the Power Plant in Toronto, Carl Louis in London, Ontario, Nickel Bushan Gallery in New York, Greenpoint Terminal Gallery in also New York, and the Art Museum at the University of Toronto. Her monumental public artwork, Subject to Change, can be seen at RBC's Water Park Place in downtown Toronto. So our talk today will run for approximately 45 minutes, which you can feel free to type any questions into the chat. There will also be a brief Q&A period at the end. And just so you know, this talk will be recorded, so please adjust your visibility settings for your comfort levels.
And everybody, thanks for coming.
Yeah, so we can get started. I thought it's always nice to start with the artist because not, just everyone has different knowledge of your work. So if you could start by just telling us a bit about your practice and how this new series has emerged. I also have a slideshow, so just let me know when you want me to put it on. I have the video and stuff like that as well.
Sure, yeah. Okay, so I'll start with the intro. My practice is multidisciplinary, and through my work, I explore questions of visual and cognitive perception. Recently, I've taken a specific interest in pareidolia, which is defined as the psychological phenomenon in which visual and audible patterns are recognized and identified in unrelated contexts. So the works in Fact or Fiction, they take the form of sculpture, painting, and video, and they employ various forms of trickery as a way of questioning the relationship between perception and truth. And so all that is to say, I guess I'm interested in the plasticity of the brain and how conflicts of perception have the power to change or shift methods of thinking, even in common everyday experiences. And so I wanted to start off to ease my own nerves and to lead us into the discussion with a little show and tell. So as part of my practice, I also have a collection of paradolic objects, which I add to and contribute to. I find these on walks that I take daily, or they're often gifted to me by friends who know that I have this collection in progress. And so I've selected 3 of my favorite rocks from my current collection, and I'm going to present them to you now. And so this one, I believe it was found on the east coast of Canada, probably in New Brunswick. And it was gifted to me by 2 of my friends named Paul and Wendy. And I'm just going to turn around. Hopefully my webcam is good enough to focus. You can see that this guy has 2 little barnacle eyes. And then the next one, which comes from the West Coast in Victoria, gifted to me by a high school friend named Steph. She sent me this in the mail. And again, it's a similar rock with 2 little barnacle eyes. This one's really big. He's much more cartoony. And then finally, a rock gifted to me by my friend Lauren. And Lauren actually helped out with building some of the frames for my paintings in the show. So hi, Lauren, thank you for that. And she found this one, I believe, maybe near Grand Bend or something like this. And it has a very different expression on this side, a little bit sleepier. All right, that's all for my intro.
Awesome. It was great to see that. I actually didn't realize when you first showed me those that they were, I thought, because I was looking at them through the webcam, I thought that they were, you had attached the eyes to it. I didn't realize they were barnacles.
Yeah, I found them like, or they found them like that. I also have another rock that's somewhere hidden in one of my studio boxes, which I made an artwork out of, that I cast in bronze that had 2 barnacle eyes, and that sort of started this collection.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And how does that, I mean, how does that connect to the rock that's in the show, the one that you made when you were young?
Oh yeah, so
Or does it?
Yeah, it does. It does. I like to think that that's probably the best artwork I've ever made. I think I made it when I was 5. We used to collect rocks when my parents would take us to the beach, and I remember having to like negotiate with them how many I could take home at the end of the day, and it being really devastating that like I could only take 2 instead of the 10 that I had, you know, painstakingly separated. So this rock must have come from one of those times, and it was, or it appeared to be shaped like a bird head. And so as a kid, as a kid does, I painted a representation of a bird head on that rock in order to like further, I mean, I didn't know this at the time, but in order to further encourage the association. And so I think it's a pretty fantastic object from my past. I think it really highlights a lot of the things that I'm currently exploring now as a 33-year-old. It's been a long time. It's been, you know, over 30 years, or no, over 25 at least. And I think about pareidolia, which I think I define it earlier. I'll define it anyways. By definition, it's the tendency for perception to impose meaningful interpretation on random stimulus, whether that be visual or audible, so that one sees an object or like pattern or meaning where there isn't one. I'm fascinated by the brain's processes of pattern recognition and how these sort of things that we perceive kind of get stored in our memory banks in order for us to further perceive things in the future. And as I've been researching pareidolia, initially I only thought that it was a visual phenomenon, but have recently learned that it's an audible one, which has kind of like led me to explore what I have in the video work that we will show you a clip of. And I think that the moment of like experiencing a paradolic instance for me is like, I almost feel it like physically, where I see that like my cognition is almost malfunctioning, which is debatable, because like, how can we really say that what I'm perceiving now as like rock is rock? And it's a moment for me where it allows me to sort of question this trust that I put in my brain to perceive things around me as fact or as true or as real, which is troubling and fascinating.
Yeah, absolutely. That's such a great sort of entry point into the way you think. And I put the link to your exhibition in the group chat in the chat for everyone, in case you want to look at the rock that Vanessa was just speaking about. You just have to scroll down to the bottom and there's the install shots of the rock that she made when she was young as well, which is in the exhibition, not for sale though.
I had to borrow it from my reluctant mother's collection. Nobody can have it.
I might start the PowerPoint just so we can look at some images too.
Yeah.
Oh wait, let me share my screen. because I wanted to ask you a bit about the paintings after some things you just said. Mhm. Can you see it?
Yep.
Okay, great. Did you want to start with the video or did you want to go in with the paintings?
Yeah, we can start with the paintings. I mean, it'll all kind of lead into, yeah, let's start with the paintings. Why not?
Sure. So yeah, I wanted to start by asking about the paintings, since it seems like this is sort of where your practice started. So you made this series for the exhibition Fact or Fiction, that are these desks. So the frame is actually lifted away from the wall, which you can see here, and sort of like a reorientation of the idea of a table as well. So I was just wondering if you could talk about this, like how did you conceptualize it? What was sort of the idea about it? And I'll just scroll through some of the examples while you're speaking.
Yeah, so I guess I'll start with some of my processes of like decision making, where it began. Lately, when I have begun a new series of paintings, I sort of make a decision about the scale and orientation before I begin. And I've been working kind of in series or, iterations in a sense. And so at the time when I decided that I would scale these to be reminiscent of, what could be defined as a standard desk, the desk for me, or the table or the work surface, had become really important, I think, partially because of, with the quarantine we were inside working on surfaces, or at least I was, a lot more than I had been in the past. And I had noticed this sort of activity that was taking place and really began to think about the desk as a psychological space. And through my paintings in the past, I've always thought about them as a surface for working things out on. They appear to be like, finished works, but to me, they feel really like they're sketches. Like I'm emptying out my pockets and seeing like what it is that I'm thinking about or thinking through onto these surfaces. So to make these desk works, it felt kind of like a literal exploration of that thought. And so if you spend a bit of time looking at them, you'll see that there are moments where whatever it is I'm representing is nonsensical in terms of like how I've chosen to depict a shadow or light. I am interested in painting's illusionistic capabilities and sort of challenging that through messing with these compositions that actually like can't make sense in reality. They're supposed to like trip you up in a sense that they might be sort of convincing but impossible as well. I want there to be moments where the images fall apart, and I think that that's where my interest in trompe l'oeil comes from, because there's always this moment where you like, if you view like a masterful trompe l'oeil painting from a certain distance, it very much tricks you, but as you approach it, there's likely a moment where that illusion falls apart, and that could be through the texture of the paint, or something along the lines of this. And so in these works, I've also chosen, like, for two reasons, to include post-it notes. One of the reasons being that I'm a painter and I needed something yellow to make the compositions feel a little bit more alive in a way. But then also that a post-it note it's sort of like this symbol for noting, for working ideas out, for like marking a page in a book that's significant, for trying to remember something, so to jog your memory, to sort of pull you out of these these moments where you're on autopilot throughout the day, and it maybe you have different uses for it, but they seemed like kind of symbolic to that process. And as I said, these paintings are kind of like, I'm imagining them as something being figured out, and I'm not sure what that is. I mean, the use of the iconic rabbit duck illusion as well as the Rubens vase illusion is kind of a way to speak about things like not really being figured out, that they're always constantly active, they're flipping back and forth. And I like that these particular like popular illusions or illusionistic figures make it really obvious to the viewer that these works are about questioning certain things about perception, because they're known. It's without doubt that they're doing that. I'm trying to think if I've gone a bit on a tangent here.
No, that's super helpful. Actually, I was going to ask you about the significance of including them into the work. Literally, is that, you know, because I know it's something like the duck rabbit and the vase illusion were something that sort of influenced your thinking. And so you're saying that including them into the paintings is like a hint almost. Is that true?
It's a hint, and it's also there as a device that is visually active. I've always prioritized in my paintings some kind of like visual energy. Mm-hmm. And I think that, you know, I think that the reason for doing that is because I'm so invested in sort of like what visual illusion can do or can trigger, and that when looking at a visual illusion, it is often active, it's often animated. Mm-hmm. And to see the brain working like right literally before or through my eyes, I find incredibly fascinating. It reminds me that like not only am I in this body, but like this body is also doing all of this stuff, and then I have this brain that's like firing things and trying to make sense of what it is exactly that's happening.
Totally. I mean, oh, sorry, I interrupted you.
Oh no, it's okay. I'm trying to think where else I was going with that. I also like the ambiguity of those two illusions, predominantly Rubens vase illusion, that it is bistable, it's flipping and it's flopping, that you can't have like the negative space without the positive space, or like in other words, you can't have the figure without the ground, that they're inseparable, that they're contingent. And in thinking through that, what does that mean? In seeing them today, do I see vase before face? In seeing them tomorrow, do I see face before vase? And I think that there isn't really like an answer to why, but that perhaps, you know, my own subjectivity of, you know, whatever it is I've experienced in that day or in my life, or what I'm currently thinking about, might result in what it is I perceive first. Mm-hmm. I actually had a friend come by the show, and we had a really interesting conversation about how I represented the duck rabbit illusion. And she'd said to me, so tell me about the dolphin in the paintings. And I stood there, I looked at her and I was like, what are you talking about? What dolphin? And she said it again, and I was like, there's no dolphin in the painting. And then she pointed it out, and I was like, oh, of course. I've taken the original duck rabbit illusion, I've like pared it down and stylized it, and then chosen to paint it gray as to represent a dolphin, which I had no idea I had done, because I was so embedded in making the work that it didn't even occur to me that it could be perceived otherwise. And so that was a really satisfying experience. And it kind of like made it worth it in a sense.
Totally. Well, yeah, now I see it for sure.
It's definitely
in the beak. I sort of had that moment too that you're describing of like not being able to sort of settle your eye. When I first did a studio visit with you with this work, it was over Zoom, and I actually didn't realize, because it was my first time witnessing your process as well, that in this work in particular, I actually thought that you had taped up sheets of paper to sort of play with layout or composition. Like I thought that the tape and the specifically the duck rabbit were pieces of paper that you had adhered to the canvas. And the tape still trips me up sometimes, like seeing it in person, right? Like it looks quite real. So you do have that sort of oscillation of flipping between, like, am I looking at a painting or am I looking at tape? So it's a nice dialogue also with the two illusions as well.
Yeah, I had moments myself where I was in the studio. I think particularly with desk number 3, I'd put like a small piece of tape in the bottom.
Oh yeah, here, bottom.
Yeah, the little tape in the bottom left. And I remember I was like going in and touching up the lines. And, you know, I work very close to the surface, and I would have these moments where I would catch a glimpse of it out of the corner of my eye and think, oh shit, I have to remove that tape. And then I'd be like, oh no, I painted that. So that was satisfying too, you know, that I could trick myself, and that I was so focused that I forgot, in a sense.
And
yeah.
Can you speak about the sort of other, you touched on the Post-its, for instance. I'm curious about the other elements that you've incorporated into these paintings. They seem to repeat, but sort of in different forms.
Yeah, so I think that the repetition is to suggest that it could be the same table over and over again, even though you'll see the sort of pattern surface in the background is actually a tracing of the wood grain that is inherent to that panel. So it's kind of representational in a way. And I use my hands a lot because there's like I have an experience of witnessing my hands outside of my body doing things in front of me, and in a sense that's always felt like a little bit surreal. In addition to using my hands, I have kind of like a selection of objects that I will trace that are immediately around me in the studio. So for example, obviously when I paint the tape, I peel it off and I put it on the surface and I trace it and then I remove it. But the circles in this one that almost look like coffee rings, and then the ones that are also used to make the shape of the oranges, or what appears to be oranges, that's the inside of the tape ring. And so yeah, I have just these tools and motifs that I continue to cycle through from work to work, and they've appeared in previous works as well. So they just kind of feel like a bit of a vocabulary for me. I will also mention, maybe it's a bit hard to see from the computer, but in these works, I became really interested in experimenting with finger painting. And so one of the reasons why I'm interested in finger painting is because, sort of for the same reasons why I'm interested in that rock sculpture that's in the show, that it was this like really primary exercise that I engaged with as a child that helped me to sort of make associations or have associative thought. Finger painting, from what I remember, was the earliest way of me like processing the world around me through art, through painting. And so I've attempted to incorporate some of that into the work. And so you look at it and it's like extremely controlled. Like, for example, like I dip my hands in the paint and I place it onto the surface, or I trace the circles with my fingers. I'm not super good at being immediate with how I apply paint. So even though it's not uninhibited like it would be if I were a child painting. It's kind of a nod to that. If you look in this one, the little bits of blue are made by my fingers, and the eyes in the rabbit duck illusions are all thumbprints. So yeah, that's kind of where that came through. And then the experience of seeing the works as well, I've chose to leave a little halo of wood around the fingerprints and the finger painting. This kind of like allows for there to be another layer in the paintings, another surface, almost like a superior surface that obscures some of the image below it. And I wanted that to sort of be maybe another possibility for the illusion to break or for you to be pulled out of it.
Mm-hmm. I actually didn't realize that the eye was your thumbprint until you just said it right now. Which just goes to show how, like, the longer you look at it, the more things emerge. I wanted to ask how these ideas connect with, you've talked before also about the history of painting, and how, illusion connects with that sort of art historical perspective of painting as well.
Yeah, so maybe I'll speak about the story of Giotto's fly as a way to connect it to the work that's in the show. So,
do you want me to skip ahead to the flies too?
Yeah, I feel like that's a good way to kind of talk about, one of the reasons why I'm interested in that story and how they came to be, and how it connects to the painting. So, in the 1550 book written by Giorgio Vasari called Lives, it's I guess small biographies about artists that he deemed relevant in the Renaissance. There's a chapter on Giotto, and it's written that while he was studying under Cimabue in Florence, that he painted an extremely realistic fly on the nose of a completed portrait by Cimabue. And when he returned to the studio, Cimabue attempted to shoo the fly away numerous times before realizing he'd been tricked by Giotto's ability to render such a likeness to the real thing. And so this story has always kind of tickled me. It was also said, like, if you read the introduction of Lives, that Vasari was like a very skilled storyteller, and it's perhaps suspected that he was capable of embellishing narrative at the expense of truth. Mm-hmm. So I liked that in the context of this show. And I also like to speculate on like what it means if like that anecdote was made up, and was that anecdote made as or written as a device to sort of like communicate ideologies of the Renaissance, which was like a supreme mastery over like the Byzantine era that happened before it. And so that's kind of where the motif of the fly came in for me, was because I was always tickled by this story. And I've called this work trompe device for, I guess, pretty obvious reasons. And in the exhibition, we have installed 30 of them that cover 2 of the large main walls. And I guess the fly is interesting because, like, symbolically in the past through painting, it was perhaps used to represent the devil or plague. It's also like very much tied to death because it plays a huge role in like the decomposition process, as we know. So with this work, I wanted there to kind of like be a moment where you would maybe like walk in and maybe accept the scene of the flies as usual or like quotidian or like normal, just even for a second. I know it's not normal to like have a swarm of flies in an art gallery. That is not normal at all, but maybe for a second you might get tripped up. but then I also was hoping that that experience might translate to something like a little bit more uncomfortable or visceral, because they are bugs. They're quite cute in real life. Like, I think they're cute.
They are, yeah.
I don't think they're gross at all, but someone might, and I hope so at some point. But there's also this moment too where when you first enter, they kind of look like these little dots on the wall, and then as you change your proximity to them, your understanding of them changes. So up close, they reveal that they are in fact metal. They're not that tricky. They end up being like cute bugs, almost, like jewelry in a sense. So yeah, I was kind of playing with this experience of viewing them and what to expect when entering the space, sort of bringing into context these ideas of trickery through painting, and then maybe the idea of attempting to gross someone out. I don't know who that person is. I hope that they tell me who they are. But yeah, I think it's maybe like a bit of a built-in failure to like that they appear up close as silver bugs, and I think that as we spoke about a little bit earlier with trompe paintings, there's a moment where the illusion falls apart. So I'm interested in that as an animated experience. I think I'm not sure how to describe it otherwise, but
Yeah, I think that there's so much there in what you just said. And the flies I find distinctively interesting in the show too, because of their ability to tap into our visceral responses, which you spoke about. And it shows to me how images and objects and this moment of thinking that it's one thing and that you're not in control of, and suddenly you're in control of it when you realize it doesn't move or it's made of silver, but it shows to me how images or encounters have this ability to sensationalize reality, right? And how quickly maybe fear can set in. That had like a very political undertone to me too, like with propaganda, and how creating an impression of something can catalyze maybe it's like strong responses of fear, or I have to protect myself or defend myself, and I think that ties up so nicely also with the sort of use of trompe l'oeil in art history as well. So there's so much in these small sculptures to me, and I was wondering what your I mean, you touched on it a bit, but what are your thoughts on that, as sort of a parallel with social contexts, or the way we may respond to propaganda or creations of illusions in this sort of political sphere?
Yeah, I think like making this body of work that maybe proposes situations that allow me or the viewer to question the trust that we placed in our brains to perceive the world around us as true, and maybe not question it. I think that that's what the work is trying to do, to bring attention to that in a sense, and not to say that this work is like explicitly pointing to the current state of the media. Mm-hmm. Well, it's not doing that, but to question like how we perceive and how we like even absorb information and question it or don't. I think that maybe some of this work might kind of like touch on that a bit. Mm-hmm. So yeah, I mean, it's been a wild year. I definitely think these things are on my mind. And even if you think, I don't know, about ideas around media literacy, like I have people in my life from what happen to be older generations that like will regurgitate certain things heard on the radio or seen on the news as truth, and like I find that incredibly troubling. So I don't know if I'm answering your question, but it kind of bumps shoulders with these ideas. It's not saying specifically like what thing in the media needs to be interrogated, because I think that's also subjective. But yeah, it's kind of impossible to ignore at the moment.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And that totally answers my question. And I like also that it sort of happens simultaneously to it rather than saying A represents B. I mean, it's very true to your practice to say it sort of weaves in and out of thinking about media and perception, but isn't explicitly about one thing. So that, yeah, that's really interesting to hear. And how does it, I mean, because you spoke about the sort of context that we're in right now. So I'm just wondering, how does it feel to have these works up now, you know? I'm so interested in the way you address the gaps between what we see and what is true. And I feel like that's sort of increasingly challenged in our context, particularly over the last few years. And so I'm just wondering, how does it feel to see these works up now? I feel like you made them fairly quickly, considering how labor intensive they are, and how much you made. It's really incredible to see that. Yeah, I'm just wondering about that.
Yeah, so that's a good question. I mean, we've had a time with this show. We were supposed to open it in March, so to have it up and not kind of sitting stagnant in the studio is really nice. I think I'm having a hard time answering this question. I think another thing that maybe the work attempts to touch on is like with access to so much information and us like being maybe also stuck inside this last year and maybe accessing more than we should ever, aside from like the 2 walks we would go on every day. I think that things can get sticky in that we can almost like seek out the proof that we need for whatever it is, whatever narrative or truth or it is that we choose to pursue or want to pursue, which is troubling. Again, I don't know if my work is like specifically talking about that, but I think that that's definitely what I'm thinking about when I'm making this work, and sort of, I guess, as I said, proposing like an entry to question. I don't know if that was a bit of a vague answer, but
no, yeah, that was great. I also wanted to ask about, so The Sky is Blue, so you have a video work in the exhibition too, and is this the first video work you've made? Like officially?
But I made a really bad one when I was in residence at the Glenfiddich distillery in Scotland,
Okay.
which no one will see. But that work was kind of the starting point for this. Like, I've been thinking about this work since I was doing that residency. It's taken a while, and I had shot the footage over, I think, 2 years.
Okay. Wow.
Really exciting. It's really exciting for it to come together.
Yeah. And sorry.
Yeah, it's technically the first one. I dabbled before.
Well, yeah, we could describe it, and it's also available online right now while the show is up. So everyone can feel free to go on. It's about 5 minutes, or you can come in person and see the show. But maybe you could tell us a little bit about it, because so you're incorporating sound as well into this, and sort of trickery in sound.
Yeah, so there's like a very specific breadcrumb trail that led me to wanting to make this work, which came through reading about pareidolia and discovering that numerous people had experienced this phenomenon audibly. One of the most commonly reported ones was that an audio paradolic experience that was the hearing of an orchestra and the sound of like a standard fan. And so, yeah, I became fascinated with that. And in thinking about it, it sort of led me to become interested in experimenting with Foley design. And so for those of you who don't know, Foley is the art of using props to create sound effects that get added to film and video in post-production. I'm mostly fascinated by Foley design that uses like weird props that have nothing to do with the image that that they're trying to enhance. So for example, you could think of like a bag of icing sugar being sort of stomped on a sound stage is used to represent the sound of polar bear walking through snow, that sort of crunch. That, and I think there'd be a different sound added onto it as well. Or the coconuts, hollow coconut shells have been used quite often to represent the sound of horse hooves. And at times also incorrectly. There's something called the coconut effect, which I think is quite funny, which I believe was coined after the Monty Python film, Monty Python and the Holy Grail. There's a scene where one of the individuals is like galloping a horse, but there's no horse. And you can hear the sound of the coconuts being used to enhance it. And apparently, because coconuts had been used to represent horse hooves so often in previous films, that the viewer actually began to expect it. And so when it wasn't there, it felt strange. And so even like a horse walking on grass, for example, you put the coconut shell, even though that makes no sense. Or a horse walking on sand, doesn't make any sense. This coconut sound would still be there and it would still be associated with that visual. And the absence of it would apparently be jarring. I don't know, I haven't experienced that myself, but in reading about it, I really liked to think how, you know, we can train our brains to associate in this way. And so all that is to say, I went on a tangent, but in the video, you'll see like on this is my left hand, on the left side, usually like shots of nature. And then on the right side it's paired with a hand performing a Foley exercise. And the hand performing the Foley exercise, the audio for that is actually informing the image on the right as well. So it's informing, or in the left as well, it's informing both. And I guess ultimately, in thinking about all these things, to me, Foley feels like a trick, like an illusion. And so I wanted to kind of like highlight that through the video work. My sister, Sabrina, she also appears in it. The reason for including her was to sort of read some text that has to do with, you know, perception and pareidolia and illusion, but also because we get audibly mistaken for each other in real life. We don't look alike, but so yeah, that's like a little personal thing that I added in, and yeah.
You sound almost identical. It's amazing.
Yeah, what else do I want to say about that? I don't know.
Well, everyone will have to see. Yeah, it's nice to hear about that in the aspect of Foley as well. And it sort of shows, I guess what's interesting about your example also of the coconuts and the horses is just like how we've also like been conditioned to expect certain sounds that actually don't exist. They don't match up in nature the way we think that they do, and how powerful that can be when it's used repetitively. Mm-hmm. And I guess like repetition is something that comes up in the video as well, because I like listen to it from my office.
Fun for you.
It is. It makes, you know, it is because it's quite soothing actually, and also I love the part where you and Sabrina just start laughing. It's like breaks it in a way that's really nice, and kind of just uplifting a little bit too.
Yeah, so for anyone who hasn't seen it, or who will see it, Sabrina and I laugh after a Foley pairing of like the sound of a mayonnaise bottle squirting, and that sounds a bit like a fart. That was why we edited it that way. A little bit of humor in there.
Exactly. I wanted to ask also now, if anyone has any questions, now's the time. We're almost at an hour, so we'd have a few minutes, or if you feel like Vanessa has answered any question you've ever had, then that works too. But now's your moment. Yeah, I don't know. Was there any questions that I didn't ask? I think I also wanted to ask about older work that you've had, like how, you know, we have a pair of your shoes out right now, as well as like, I was also thinking about how the Inkblot works you do connect with maybe the vase illusion or the duck rabbit illusion. So I'll send a link in the chat right now, but Vanessa did a really great exhibition in Chicago. It was a 2-person show with Michelle Grabner, and she did these works that were really influenced by Inkblot. What are they called again?
Yeah, Inkblot or klecksography is like the process of like making art through Inkblots. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so I started those works. I actually started doing Inkblot prints in the studio as a way to generate imagery for works, and I also liked the connection to the Inkblot's use in like psychoanalysis, and like through the Rorschach test. So what I did was I implemented this daily practice of making Inkblots, which is exactly how it sounds. I would take a piece of paper, put a bunch of paint on it, and then push it together, and then you have an Inkblot. Again, they weren't very loose. They were very controlled because I don't know how to relinquish that much control. And so they ended up kind of, I ended up creating a bunch that looked the same, and I had piles and piles of them, and I was like, oh my God, what do I do with all these things? Why am I making these? And so naturally I began to categorize them. So what I did was I began categorizing them by shape, and through those piles that I was of shapes, I decided I needed to make another decision, which was, for some reason, I thought I would tape them together like a zigzag strip. And so then I had these objects in the studio, and I was like, okay, now what do I do with these? And this zigzag kind of motif is something that has been present in my work in the past, as a way just to like very easily represent three-dimensional space on a two-dimensional surface. So that felt really natural to engage with. And basically what I did was I ordered a bunch of panels that were like around the scale of these strips. So the strips determined the shape of the painting. And then I rendered them. I rendered images of these strips on those paintings, and then I sat with them and allowed myself to think associatively, to sort of like give a familiar shape or object to those ink blots. So for example, one of them looked like a tree, a naked tree. And I put a bunch of red circles to suggest apples. Or another one looked a little bit like a bird. So then I assigned like a triangular beak to it, and I cut out these like funny little 3-footed legs to suggest bird. And that was kind of how that project.
I didn't actually realize that was your process. It's really interesting. You do have a question from Kim. In your research, did you find that pareidolia is universally experienced, or is it specific to a certain cognitive or to certain cognitive capacities?
Well, I think that I mean, I'm not a paradolic scientist, but there are different ways that people process things. Like, for example, some individuals can't recognize people's faces. They're not super recognizers. And then on the other side of that spectrum, there's someone called a super recognizer who can like be in a crowd and see someone that they don't even interact with, and then like see them 5 years later and recognize them from that moment. So yeah, I think there's absolutely certain cognitive capabilities. I don't have like a blueprint of that or the ability to really speak to that. And again, I'm working through my own subjectivity and my own experience of the world. But yeah, I mean, I would love to know more for sure.
You have another question. One thing, are there any fiction mysteries you're hesitant to approach? Maybe because the fiction is meaningful or overwhelming? Great question.
Oh my God. Um, are there any fact or fiction mysteries you're hesitant to approach? Probably. Yeah, I mean, I think there's I think my choice to speak about things broadly in my work maybe has to do with a lack of like wading through vulnerable things in the public eye, if that answers your question. I mean, I think the most personal I've ever gotten in my work is including my sister and I in that video. But yeah, these things definitely come up in my personal life.